involving male fluid of a magician that would be put on a stone, some type of special sunstone that then would be used in, well, artificial insemination. But not just that, that it creates a chamber in which this mixture can putrefy or grow, a hermetically sealed chamber. Then they take this cow and lock her in a house with no sunlight. This is to be the second womb. Now listen to this, another translation from the book. Quote, while awaiting the birth of the animal, the magician mixes a powder made of crushed sunstone, sulfur, magnet, and green zinc stirred in with the sap of aqua semen of a white willow. This is some type of mixture upon which the cow gives birth. The creature is placed into this powder and is instantly clothed in human flesh. Now this newborn tiny humanoid is kept in a large glass or vessel for 3 days until it becomes exceedingly hungry. It is then fed for 7 days on its mother's blood and develops into a complete animal, with which other marvels can be performed. For instance, it can be placed on a white cloth with a mirror in its hands and suffumigated with the previously mentioned powder mixed with human blood. Then, the moon will appear to be full on the last day of the month. Or, it can be decapitated and its blood collected. If the blood is given to a man to drink, he will assume the form of a bovine or a sheep, but if he is anointed with it, he will have the form of an ape. Finally, if the animal is fed for 40 days on a diet of blood, milk, and semen, then its guts are extracted from its belly and rubbed on someone's hands and feet, he may walk on water or traverse the diameters of the earth in the winking of an eye. End quote. Now this is very interesting because at first, many may think that this is all hallucinated, or one could say some type of astral magic if you're going to be traveling at such speeds and performing miraculous feats. But on another level, there may be something else going on with this book. The homunculus is a soul that has been placed into an artificial body. As we'll see, it's not detailed in this book, but there's another component to this homunculus that must be considered. The reason that this being is magical is because it's an artificially created being that was manifested in accordance to astrology. But more importantly, the magician could implant the soul of the planets themselves into this new artificial body. We will discuss that more later, as it may complicate things now, but we can't deduce that this is false just because miracles and strange events start occurring. It may seem impossible, but we're dealing with different states here. The next part of the book makes the subject even more insane. The next chapter in the Book of Cow covers the artificial generation of a rational animal by a similar ritual with the cow, but this time it's with a female ape. It says that her offspring undergoes, quote, appropriate manipulations. Is this where monsters and cryptids come from? Even different type of deformed humans like the one-legged man? This directly connects the monstrous beings from Christianity to the alchemist and artificial creation. Could this knowledge have been wiped? The Book of the Cow was very difficult to find, and there are no full English translations. They would literally create mythical beings, whatever they wanted, and they would sculpt, shape, and create these deformed beings physically, like merging different pieces from different bodies, and then doing this at such an early stage so that the being would then grow into all sorts of creatures. Think about it, the basilisk, monsters with human heads, even the demons from grimoires. These are all different types of homunculus. In the book, it also discusses how one can take the organs of the creature and rub them into certain spots that gain the powers of that organ. Since the homunculus is a magical creature, the organs are magical and are connected more in tune with the astral, and therefore they can see and communicate with spirits. By rubbing the eyes of the homunculus into one's eyes, the ability would be gained to be able to see all spirits and demons, as the homunculus can. Henry Cornelius Agrippa actually references Plato, but scholars say that he's not speaking of the actual Plato, but of the same author as Picatrix in the Book of the Cow, as an authority on the manufacture of magical lamps. Again, why would these alchemists, the people who were writing the earliest versions on the book, say Plato? And then this was also believed by Agrippa? The Book of Laws, or also known as Liber Numit, the Hebrew translation, we can see clearly that Agrippa references the artificial generation of monsters and how they are not according to the laws of nature. The Book of Cow also interestingly has other extraordinary rituals that can cause the moon to split in half, and also to cause the appearance of giants. Is it possible that someone could create a giant homunculus? There's a phenomenal paper by Liana Saeed called The Cows and the Bees, where she really dives into the Arabic sources and the differences contained with the Book of the Cow in comparison to Pingree analysis of the book, concluding that it was an example of Neoplatonic thought. She breaks down some really crazy sources, but first, we need to discuss the bees. If you haven't seen the Ancient Cloning Factories video, go check it out as it's going to start really connecting here. There's bee symbolism throughout masonry, occult brotherhoods, and royalty, not to mention alchemy. Yes, even the postcards. Now we know what they're referring to. Because this ritual discussed in the Book of the Cow or Liber Vaccae is actually an ancient ritual of spontaneous generation that has been practiced for thousands of years. Supposedly, again, I have different views on the timeline, but forgetting that for now. The Book of the Cow and the Latin translation are dated around the 12th century, but the original Arabic sources could be of an earlier age. However, we can find a reference to this exact same ritual in ancient Rome, which we now know was used to create some type of demon homunculus, one that was prophetic in nature. The proof is contained in Book 4 of Virgil's Georgics, which is a famous poem. Virgil was an ancient Roman poet who played a vital role in shaping Latin literature. In lines 281 through 314, we get instructions very similar to Liber Vaccae, but 1,000 years earlier. Quote, "But if someone's full brood has suddenly failed, and he has no stock from which to recreate a new line, then it's time to reveal the famous invention of Aristeus, the Arcadian master, and the method by which in the past the adulterated blood of dead bullocks has generated bees." Well, that line on the stock was a little suspicious. They had to recreate a new line? But let's continue. What we're looking at is an ancient reference to alchemy, but it just wasn't called that yet. Now, that was from a later translation. It says a dead bullocks, but in the original Latin, it goes, quote, "First, a small and contracted place is chosen and adopted for the purpose, and they press the walls of the narrow roof with tiles and add 4 hives at the corner, 4 slanting windows for the winds. Then a calf, already curling its 2-year-old horns on its forehead, is sought. The double nostrils and breath of its mouth are stopped up with many obstructions, and having been killed by blows, its entrails are loosened through its intact skin. So they leave it lying in a confined space and put broken branches beneath the rib bones, and fresh thyme and cassia. This is done when the west winds first drive the waves, before the meadows blush with new colors, before the chattering swallow suspends its nest from the rafters. Meanwhile, the moisture heated in the soft bones seethes, and the miraculous animals that are to be seen by the modes, first deprived of feet, then buzzing with wings, mix together and more skim the thin air." End quote. So hold up, that's alchemy. And they're even using herbs and timing references. They even are hermetically sealing the cow. Well, come to find out, there's actually a name for this ritual. It's called the Ancient Art of Begonia. This was an ancient ritual on the generation of bees. And they even try to say on the wiki that it was more just poetic or some learned trope rather than an actual practice. I think that seems like a cover-up because it's clear that this is not poetic. This is the exact same ritual that's mentioned in Liber Vaccae. It's also found in Byzantine Geoponica. Perhaps the earliest mention is by Nicander of Colophon. The Hermetic Charonides reported that worms are born after 1 week and bees after 3 weeks, which again confirms without a doubt that is what we were dealing with in the Book of the Cow, but it specifically ties the creation of the homunculus to far more earlier origins. especially if we consider the queen bee with Diana of Ephesus. Quoting Ovid's Metamorphosis 361-68, Laurentinius of the Geoponica reports the process as proven and obvious fact. Quote, "If any further evidence is necessary to enhance the faith in things already proved, you may behold the carcasses decaying from the effect of time and tepid moisture change into small animals. Go and bury slaughtered oxen. The fact is known from experience. The rotten entrails produce flower-sucking bees, who, like their parents, roam over pastures, bent upon work and hopeful of the future. A buried war horse produces the hornet." End quote. So, let's keep in mind that he mentioned the oxen and a horse, and he's literally saying to have faith in it because it is a fact known from experience. He didn't mention this, but John Baptista della Porta in Natural Magic brings this up and goes into way more detail. The fact that Aristotle did not mention Begonia, yet does have a section on bees, have led scholars to believe that Begonia wasn't real. Well, the authors discussing this were not just being poetic, but also cryptic, similar to the alchemist. Aristotle could have left that out because it's far too occult. Even Celsus, who spoke of the ancient Hyperboreans, was against the practice. This was a secret art form, or a cult ritual which was only known to the adepts of the order. Archelaus calls bees the factitious progeny of a decaying ox. And in De Agricultura, written by Marcus Gatto, also known as Gatto the Elder, in 160 BC, the conversation between Vasius and another character touches upon the concept of begonia, or the belief in the spontaneous generation of bees from the carcass of an ox. The Greek term begonias, born of an ox, is used to describe these bees. Okay, so it's not mentioned for like 1,000 years, and then out of nowhere, it just pops up again in Liber Vaccae, or Book of the Cow. Interestingly, it doesn't seem that the two are directly connected. But Pietro de Crescenzi, an Italian jurist, agronomist, and author, refers to begonia around 1304 in the Book of Rural Benefits. Also, begonia is very close to Bologna. I wonder if there's a connection there. In 1475, Conrad of Megenberg, in the first German book of natural history, claimed that the bees are born from the skin and the stomach of an ox. Michael Herring gives a detailed description of begonia drawn from Geoponica. Johannes Kolletisch, whose book constituted the book of reference for many generations of apiarists expressing the same belief in begonia. The method appears even in European apiculture books of the 1700s. So, you're telling me that this was an ancient practice in Rome, referenced by several reputable sources, but mainstream scholars tell us it's just poetic? Then over 1,000 years pass by, and then it's referenced as a very real thing by Italian and German writers on agriculture. It was still referenced and discussed as a practice up to the 1700s, so even Gatto the Elder makes reference to the Bible that has a story or allusion to this. Quote, "Out of the eater came forth meat, and out of the strong came forth sweetness." Judges 14. In the book of Judges, where Samson puts forward the riddle of "out the strong came forth sweetness," referring to a swarm of bees found inside of a dead lion. There are several commenters, including Vasius, who cited this allusion to suggest to Varro that while he might not know nothing much about cattle, his attempt to deal with the subject might prove some useful discussion. This reveals that obviously this was a secret practice. That will become more clear as we proceed. Okay, so let's go back to the Book of the Cow, or Liber Vaccae, and take some more notes. So essentially, this strange book discusses how to use blood or sperm to produce an artificial or spontaneous generation of a magically powerful, rational animal that can tell the maker anything that it would like to know. This tends to lead people into thinking that it's just fantasy, but this just dives into deeper aspects of the occult that are not known by most people. This book is essentially showing you how to create a god being, some type of prophet. They obviously are not giving the full details and being cryptic, but we will see more examples of this as we proceed. They wanted to create an intelligent being that can learn, talk, and even give wisdom. It became an issue. Because this was grown outside of the womb of the mother, it would seem this leads to dark and negative manifestations as the homunculus were turned demonic in nature. Some scholars argue that it's evident that Paracelsus read the Book of the Cow, or Liber Vaccae, and it had influenced his writings. The fact that he didn't bring it up shows how well preserved the secret is. The author of the original Book of the Cow seems to view this being as demonic in nature. But interestingly, there are other techniques described where the adept can get around this issue and make a wholly new species, including, for instance, a girl with the face of a boy, or even, with a bit of luck, a being with prophetic powers. They are discussing how to literally cause changes in the way it looks, even the face. Okay, now this is insane. Inside the text, it begins to discuss a method in which you can get around the issue. How to create a non-demonic homunculus. The text explains by placing the glass vessel that contains the being in a large metal rotating sphere designed to simulate the effects of the crystalline sphere that rotate about the Earth itself? Whoa, what? None of the later alchemists mention this device whatsoever. And think about that. We're getting really deep in this fantasy if it's all just imagination. They literally were designing imaginary machines? Or is it possible that this was actually a real device? Very strange. So there are more methods for creating a more pure homunculus written in this text. They knew exactly what they were trying to achieve. Also, some early alchemists who referenced or wrote on this text explain how the female seed is not necessary at all to contribute to generation. All that is needed is the male seed. We should also mention that the book does cover some extraordinary rituals such as how to cause the moon to split in half, and also how to create giants. It would seem the subject of giants may be related here, as Paracelsus even makes reference to this. So what do we know so far? Well, it would seem this Liber Vaccae book is discussing experiments that require sex with an animal, the creation of a human-like being and or monster-like being, depending on the variables at play, and also some type of skin that can be made from alchemical powder in which the creature is placed in this glowing skin. It's quite detailed. Then it continues explaining the different abilities and powers of these beings. In this case of the cow, it would seem all holes must be closed and the female animal's private parts plugged. But there's another component to this powder skin. They had other methods. Now this is insane, so prepare yourself. But literally, the text discusses how you can actually design a skin or a costume for the creature in which to place it in, and it will grow and form into. Basically, once you have the early form of the creature as the animal gives birth to this rotting tiny creature, then they use this powder and or create an artificial skin that they designed literally with different animal parts and or heads, and this outfit would wrap around the newly created being. So now let's look at the work that inspired the Book of the Cow, because on its own it doesn't really explain too much, and it seems as if it may just be one rare example. But that's the point I'm trying to make clear. It isn't. And the reason that we don't see more examples of this is because it was literally a secret art, and they only spoke about this between members of the Brotherhood. Why do we know this? Well, because they literally were translating this by hand, and it was kind of a thing that would be shared between the bros where they would copy the text, and they were even found in Christian monasteries. So what were the monks doing with this information? Even John Dee is said to have owned a copy. What happened is these actually come from older Arabic sources, and around the 12th century, they began translating and exchanging this text between elite members. However, this led to the text eventually being released to the public, as there are some in private collections. Let's start off with Nabatean Agriculture, a 10th century text by Ibn Washia. This is a very important text and claimed to be the most influential, literally, the first text or book on agriculture. really, and even the author claims that it's based on a 20,000-year-old Mesopotamian text. That's interesting to note because that means they got it from somewhere else. There is a chapter on the Abraham tree where the author gives instructions for artificially generating an extraordinary creature. He described it as having the form of a winged, two-handed fish. This account is actually repeated in multiple texts. The generated animal has special occult abilities which are used to cause certain effects in the sky and stars. The author even clearly states that these were secret operations. Okay, so we gotta bring up Picatrix, which is suspected to be the first grimoire or the first major release on magic. This Arabic text inspired all other grimoires from the Western tradition. It was the foundation for the Western alchemical tradition. Picatrix is the Latin name. The original title is Gayat al-Hakim, which most scholars assume was written in the 11th century, though arguments have been made to place it in the first half of the 10th century. The name of the book translates to the aim of the sage or the goal of the wise, and there are some interesting things to take from the book. It's not so graphic as the Book of the Cow, but we bring it up because it's actually its counterpart, and some scholars argue that they were written by the same author. One recent study in Studia Islamica suggests that the authorship of this work should be attributed to Qasim al-Qurtubi, who according to Ibn al-Faradi was a man of charms and talismans. The Picatrix reveals how to create talismans using astrological influences and in a sense capture their energies into an object. Now although there's no homunculus mentioned, there is a part on artificial generation. The Picatrix does include examples for the artificial generation of both rational and irrational animals, not by penetration, but how to create green scorpions and snakes, which shows Paracelsus had been reading these earlier texts, and others like Della Porta. He also mentions that the Indians are masters at this art, and I thought that was interesting because of all the references from ancient Greek historians and philosophers discussing as a fact that India was full of hybrid-like creatures and monsters such as werewolves, blemmies, and the one-legged Bigfoot human. There's another Arabic text named Kitab al-Sumam. We find a description for creating a rational, wild animal, which is a beast with a human head, a tail and 4 feet, 2 of which will be hoofs. By looking at the creature, it can cause death. Well, that might be our earliest basilisk reference. It's just a slightly different variation. Interestingly, there's only one instance for the generation of animals with the heads and bodies resembling different creatures, and it only survives in one single manuscript. It's called Oyun al-Hakal-Ik. Saif gives us information on this in her The Cows and the Bees. The text translates to The Sources of Truths and the Explication of Paths, a text on the magical practices which contain 26 chapters that correspond to the sections in Liber Vaccae. This gives us a glance into the Arabic reception of Kitab al-Nawamis. Quote, of the Arabic texts which bear some relation to Liber Vaccae, al-Iraqi's Oyun al-Hakal-Ik corresponds most closely with the content of the Latin translation. End quote. She doesn't provide a full translation, but we do have the original text. It would just take more time to research. However, we do know that the text references the instructions on how to generate scorpions and snakes. Quote, description of the fermentation of snakes. If you want this, take as many big spiders as you can, put them in a glass bottle and overwhelm them with jennet milk, enough to submerge them and leave it in manure for 4 weeks. A red snake will be generated from it. If instead of spiders a big tarantula is placed, a snake like a serpent will be generated from it. If it stings a human, it kills him on the spot and in the same hour, having no antidote. This book is really strange, and it has all sorts of creatures and hybrids. Perhaps they're methods in which one could create their own monster. There's even a human-like creature hybrid with horns. Saif makes the argument that these writings correlate both with the Picatrix and Liber Vaccae. The Arabs were the Saracens. This would hint that the Saracens revived this art and then it was erased. They were also connected with the Templars. They obviously did not want this to be known. Did they have the ability to create hybrid creatures? It would explain more clearly why they have hybrid symbols on their churches. We'll come back to that. The author of the Picatrix was greatly influenced by Ibn Washia's Nabatean agriculture and Jabir ibn Hayyan. He's an even earlier Paracelsus and is the author of an enormous number and variety of works in Arabic, often called the Jabirian corpus. The works that survive today mainly deal with alchemy and chemistry, magic, and Shiite religious philosophy. However, the original scope of the corpus was vast and diverse, covering a wide range of topics ranging from cosmology, astronomy, and astrology, over medicine, pharmacology, zoology, and botany to metaphysics, logic, and grammar. We know this because several authors throughout history have made references to his books. Jabir ibn Hayyan is one of the most brilliant and intelligent scientists in the golden era of Muslims. He is famous for inventing various instruments for chemistry experiments. He discovered new chemicals which include hydrochloric acid. He was the first to produce sulfuric acid and nitric acid. Sulfuric acid is used in car batteries today. Hayyan was a prolific writer, authoring more than 3,000 research articles and treatises in his life, and more than 70 books were translated into other languages. There's even some debate about whether he was actually able to complete that many works or if it even existed. This tends to lean towards the idea that they were actually manipulating the timeline and creating false figures to represent bodies of knowledge and then compiling that under a pseudonym or figure. Forgetting that, Hayyan is well referenced and considered to be one of the founding fathers of chemistry. In his works, Hayyan says that artificial generation of minerals, plants, and animals is the art of imitating nature, and that he also relates it to the Greco-Egyptian and Hermetic practice of animating statues. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. Hayyan argued that you could not only mimic God and his creations, but also produce ones never seen before. Hayyan even refers to an experiment with elements familiar to us by now. Whoever takes a bull, it is best if it is red, then leads it into a house, throws leaves of hashashia to it, shuts the door through which it has entered, opens 4 windows above it and around the house, and abandons the bull until it dies and putrefies. As a result, bees will generate from it. Jabir ibn Hayyan describes experiments of his own in his Kitab al-Tajmi. Using sperm and blood, he placed a medium inside a sphere that contained the image of an animal to be generated. Now this is insane, because we're getting into more details on these devices now. This is what makes Hayyan's work differ from others is he actually describes this thing as some type of apparatus with concentric half spheres in which you were to place your mold, or in some translations the image of what you want this being to be. It was a homunculus rotisserie machine, more so like some type of advanced armillary sphere to mimic the cosmic system, and the homunculus in its artificial womb would be rotating within a sphere within a sphere. Hayyan's works goes into how to change the face or to give it different genders and different levels of intelligence. He even discusses different schools or methods in which you could create a winged man by mixing the sperm of a man and a bird. I don't know about you, but I feel like this deserves more attention because not only is this the foundation of all the other alchemists we brought up earlier, but it shows the deeper, disturbing aspects of this art. It's quite shocking to realize that this is what some of the most influential minds of history were actually getting into. To explain more, Hayyan discusses this in more detail. This homunculus device was created to solve the issue of the demons manifesting. They wanted to literally create an intelligent human. So the works of Hayyan and al-Kutubi, the alleged writer of Picatrix and the Book of the Cow, prove the subject of Gorgonia is connected to artificial generation and the creation of homunculus. This is because they are part of the same science and art of encapsulating a soul, as mentioned earlier. This encompasses many different works on magic, including talismans and causing change from a distance. Al-Kutubi also speaks on the necessity of the planets and the infusion of their energies during spontaneous generation. This is something that is crucial to the process, but not brought up by later authors on the subject, and if they do mention it, they left details out and or were being cryptic. This seems to be one of the most crucial aspects to the art. The one who is ignorant of making talismans cannot artificially create light or the homunculus. That's not to say the homunculus is just a talisman, but they're connected. But keep that in mind that the generation of animals require fermentation or putrefaction. Also, in Nabatean agriculture, even Washia tells us that the astrological elections are essential in artificial generation. Quote, none of these operations of generation can succeed without making sure that the moon is waxing and safe from malefics. Also, the tail of the dragon cannot be in its node nor in a crooked sign nor the end of signs. These creations and generations follow the same course as talismans, for they need elections and making good the moon in the same manner as these talismans require. End quote. Al-Qurtubi defines happen as creating a, quote, moist material at the location of generation and the utilizing the receptivity of images and forms. End quote. One of the authors that influenced Jabir, another author under a pseudonym apparently, Apollonius Sir al-Khalika, The Secret of Creation, a work that discusses on how at the moment of conception, when semen and blood congeal, the resulting embryo stays still for an hour. Then, it undergoes fermentation. The heat of the fermentation initiates its development. In one of the experiments of artificial generation related in Nagaya, which produces a semi-brute, Shib Hayawan, by inserting human or other animal semen inside an egg. The process of fermentation is referred to also as feed anah, incubation. So wait, is that the story that Agrippa was referring to? So they were inserting human seeds into eggs to hatch? Where have we seen that before? Also, in his work Nabatean Agriculture, Ibn Washia elaborates further on the theory of artificial generation, particularly of plants. He emphasizes the benefit gained from the practice in it. Quote, the chapter with the greatest benefit, it is superior to grafting, because it leads whoever knows it to achieve the generation of takwin, of fruitful trees, and the generation of tal-li, of pulses, herbs, beneficial medicines, and harmful poisons. The process called takwin, tal-li, or tafin, requires the power known as the nature of natures, tabi al-tabi'al, which humans are able to reproduce. This is a gift bestowed upon them by the gods. Every plant originated from an ancestor generated by an ancient inventor, Al-Qadim al-Makhatari, who gave people the power to emulate his actions. The most essential natural action for the process is fermentation, tafin, which requires the joining of moisture and heat in the soil. If standing water remains stagnant, it will make the land around it wet. If the land is wet, the moisture in its cavity becomes salty and is absorbed by the soil. Moist and hot air hits it with a soft heat. Then the sun heats it with a heat that is fiercer than the heat of the air, and as a result, fermentation is achieved. If it ferments, it is changed, and if it is changed, it is altered. This alteration is a transformation. Once it is transformed through fermentation, it forms the nature, which is the power generated from the four qualities in the earth and the collaboration of the two heats, air and sun, overwhelming the two colds, water and earth. End quote. So this is important because it's connected to Aristotle's account on generation, quite mechanistic, and does consider the influence of planetary effusions and rays, yet the Arabic sources do. Which makes no sense because some of these Arabic sources take on pseudo-names and credit the works to these Greek philosophers. This would lend to the idea that Aristotle was leaving information out and or is from a different time period than they tell us. In a later passage, Ibn Washia adds that fermentation happens by constant exposure of moisture to heat. which leads the moisture itself to be transformed into a state between water and oil. This is how a truffle coagulates into a soft, solid mass. Then, a second fermentation is required to initiate growth. The Arabic sources go into more detail on the power of the moon. The prominent astrologer Abu Mashar al-Bakri notes the moisture and fermentation, tafin, are both lunar effects. This influential 10th century coterie of anonymous philosophers known as Ikhwan al-Safa, the Brethren of Purity, explain in their Al-Risala al-Jamiyad, the comprehensive epistle, that the motion of the moon generates truffles and also some animals, like birds, silkworms, and bees, adding that most of them are created in 14 days and emerge after nursing in 21 days, for this is the period of the moon coursing from day of incubation until exiting from the sun. Basically what they're saying is that this is literally a natural process. Not just that, yes, sexual intercourse happens naturally, but they're describing phenomena in which animals are being generated due to astrological influences alone. During certain conditions and or time periods, this could spawn a variety of different animals. According to these ancient sages, it has to do with these energies being the crucial component to artificially generating life, and that it actually occurs in nature without human intervention. Okay, so there's actually another section of Nabatean agriculture where Ibn Washia discusses the bee ritual, but he mentions something else this time. Now this is insane. Ibn Washia discusses spontaneous generation of fauna and the generation of bees from bulbs. This time, we also learn about regions where humans and animals exist only through spontaneous generation. For example, he relates that in the Indian Sea, during springtime, sometimes a hand emerged which people reported and contemplated. Every year, this hand had a different color, proving that the sightings related to many individuals, not just one. In the same sea, mermaids and mermen were reported to have been caught in fishermen's nets. They were alive, sentient, and noble. The adult mermen had beards and were called the doctors of the sea, Tabib al-Bad, while those without beards had tiny teeth like those of boys. Weird that he mentions that because there's barely any historic images of this begonia ritual, the bee from the cow ritual, and the one image that there is of it literally shows mermaids, so not sure what to make of that other than they're telling you what this actually was. Ibn Washia continues and says, humans, or human-like creatures, can be artificially generated too. We're told about this magus, Ankabutha, who described in his book on the subject how he generated a creature which was like a human, but lacked speech or understanding. Ankabutha received this information from a certain book on the mysteries of the sun by Asclepius, messenger of the sun. Rasul al-Shams related how he created the cosmic man, al-Insan al-Khani. Ankabutha asserts that the artificial generation of humans in the microcosm is a sublunary reproduction of divine creation. Ibn Washia admits that for his own part, he failed to achieve an operation like this, whereas Ankabutha did not fail due to the virtue of his knowledge in talismanic and magical works, because in practice, the method of generation is the same method of making talismans and magic. Whoever is able to make talismans, all the works of creation and generation are easy to him. So look at this. These ancient alchemists, who supposedly are the first sources, all write about earlier sources as if they did not compare to the original masters. Supposedly, the author failed in creating humans with intelligence, but the author of the book that he got his knowledge from was a master with even more wisdom, which proves that they had the art of creating humans mastered before the source. Therefore, in Ibn Washia's works in both Kitab al-Suman and his Nabatean agriculture, makes it clear that the understanding of fermentation, spontaneous generation, astrological influences, and occult properties is essential in performing artificial generation, or in other words, the creation of a homunculus. In these works, we actually also find a theory and operation which fit into the alchemical and magical tradition that includes the Picatrix, Liber Vacae, and the works of Paracelsus. Understanding this proves that the Book of the Cow, or Liber Vacae, and the Arabic works connected to the Picatrix are a part of the same tradition. There was an ancient Greek reference that we left out at the beginning because it's quite strange. However, we now have arrived at one of the earliest accounts of the homunculus, Zosimos of Panopolis, a Greco-Egyptian alchemist and Gnostic mystic who lived during the transition between the 3rd and 4th centuries. Zosimos is created with authoring the oldest known alchemical literature, the Chirec Meta, a Greek term meaning things made by hand. He is one of about 40 authors represented in a compendium of alchemical writings that was probably put together in Constantinople in the 7th or 8th century, copies of which exist in manuscripts in Venice and Paris. In Ibn al-Nadim's Kitab al-Faris, 4 books by Zosimos are mentioned. Although attributed to Dosimos, and Rimos, due to transliteration inconsistencies, Fuad Zeskin, a historian, located Zosimos manuscripts in 6 libraries worldwide. Zosimos' works significantly influenced the Arabic alchemical tradition, as it is referenced in several works. While Zosimos' conception of the homunculus differs from the traditional alchemical version, renowned psychologist Carl Jung identified it as the first instance of the homunculus idea in alchemical literature. In his work on virtue, Zosimos recounts a series of dreams that demand symbolic interpretation, providing an intriguing glimpse into the early development of the homunculus concept and its relationship to alchemy and mysticism. Quote, I fell asleep, and I saw a sacrificer before me on the altar in the form of a flax. The altar where the priest was had 15 steps. I heard his voice coming from above say, I have undergone the action that consists in descending the 15 steps, radiating darkness, and in ascending the steps sending forth light. The sacrificer himself is remaking me by rejecting the thickness of my body and consecrated out of necessity. I am perfected as Numa. Having heard the voice of him who was in the flask, I asked him to tell me who he was. I am Aeon, the priest of inaccessible places, for someone has come at the break of dawn, running, and he has made himself my master, cutting me apart with a knife, tearing me asunder according to the constitution of harmony, and skinning my entire head with the sword that he clasped. He intertwined the bones with the flesh and burned me up with a scorching fire from his hand until I had learned to become Numa by metamorphosing my body. Behold the intolerable violence that is my lot. As he was saying these things, I was pressing him to talk. His eyes became like blood, and he vomited forth his flesh. And I saw him change into a mutilated homunculus, Anthroparion, biting himself and wounding himself with his own teeth. Seized with fear, I thought, is it not thus that the composition of the waters is produced? And I was convinced that I had understood well. End quote. That seems way more than just a dream. And where did they get the imagination for this type of stuff? Zosimos provided one of the first definitions of alchemy as a study of the composition of waters, movement, growth, embodying and disembodying, drawing the spirit spirits from bodies and bonding the spirits within bodies. End quote. Why is the eye such a prominent symbol in occult secret societies? Let us explore further, as the symbol should be quite clear to see now. Let's dive down the rabbit hole with an alchemical text and let's just break it down. The work Kabbalah by Spiegel der Kunst und Natur in Alchemia, 1615, which translates to Kabbalah, mirror or art in nature in alchemy. And in this fascinating alchemical text, authored by Stefan Michelspacher, a German alchemist, it features 4 captivating engravings by artist Raphael Custos. These are very unveiling because The idea behind these works is that it would merge Hermetic symbolism, single point perspective, and the concept of mirrors, or a double self, to guide the reader through an alchemical journey of understanding. They literally put the meanings into these images to be decoded. It's obvious once you see it. The book attempts to use the concept of mirrors to understand the self, the mysteries of alchemy and divinity. The emphasis on mirrors is also connected to a trend during the 16th and 17th centuries, where several publications used terms such as the speculum or spiegel. What's interesting is that this single point perspective was literally a device in which they would communicate this secret meaning. Think about it. Perspective was just being developed during this time, so images with this technique, which revolutionized art and visual representation, were believed to have a deeper, mystical significance during this time. It brings you into the image, you go into another world, you go through the mirror. And they understood this type of symbolism extensively, but the stranger part of all this is their connection to royals and, well, human farming. People began to think that images drawn using the single point perspective system could create magical mirrors, capable of revealing hidden knowledge and truths. They literally believe this to be a portal for demons and higher metaphysical beings, including John Dee, who was known to use magic mirrors, but also believed the single point perspective system could be a magic mirror on its own. This idea was rooted in the belief that such images could serve as a bridge between the material world and the spiritual realm, providing glimpses into the mysteries of the universe and the divine. We must consider that from this point on in our journey, we must look at this information from a more occult or esoteric point of view. The knowledge of the alchemist is secretly encoded within these images, and they're actually telling you within the text. They're attempting to speak to the inner levels of one's psyche. This knowledge is encoded within the image or speculum, the magic mirror. This is the only way we can read between the lines of many of these writers on these obscure topics. We begin the Hall of Mirrors with the cover of the book being a Tudor rose with a crown. There's also an emblem in the intro with a plant stem coming out of a cube. After the book goes in detail on the occult and alchemical philosophy, it even mentions the homunculus. Now we're not going to read the entire thing, but I couldn't find an English translation of this text. Therefore, we translated the original German text so that you could check it out yourself. This was published in 1663, after spontaneous generation had already begun to be debated. Yet this proves without a shadow of a doubt that they were being very secretive about this process. The book doesn't directly say the term homunculus, but let's really bring up some of the questionable quotes from this book before we get to the emblems. It's pretty clear what they're discussing now that we know some history. The author begins with the cryptic philosopher's stone, stating what a wise old stone and that it is threefold. Let's remember that. He begins with his analogy of mirrors, after giving praise to the royalty of his time. He begins discussing the secret, or at least what they perceive to be the secret of single point perspective. He even makes reference to the reader being compared to the prisoners in Plato's cave allegory, basically saying that the readers aren't on his level or that they couldn't even begin to understanding the forms that he's discussing. So that's kind of the approach that these scientists were taking with this type of knowledge. But he continues. He says the purpose of giving this knowledge of the mirror, for those who can understand it, of course, is so that according to their desires, and create much fruit and benefit. Okay, so this is about creating fruits. Interestingly, the author says he is unworthy of this knowledge, and the only way he can pass it on is through the secret art of mirrors. He says, quote, through the understanding of this mirror, they can achieve great benefits in various aspects of life, such as maintaining good health, sustaining their bodies with abundant necessities, and nurturing their souls to find eternal life. As seekers of knowledge and practitioners of this art, it is essential to be open to understanding and learning. For only then can one grasp the true essence of this mysterious and transformative discipline. End quote. He begins discussing these mirrors in comparison to alchemy. The first mirror represents the initial stage, where the practitioner works with the basic elements of nature, mercury and salt, to extract the essential properties needed for the transformation. In this mirror, the author sees the wise and mercury in their salt, which are the initial substances to be worked with. This could be seen as the mixing and combination of the elements. The second mirror symbolizes the stage where the alchemist works with sulfur, another key element in the alchemical process. Here, the author sees the sulfur of the wise, similar to the flower called chelidinium, which represents the transformative power of sulfur in alchemy. The vegetable essence mentioned signifies growth and multiplication, which is the goal of the alchemist. The third mirror stands for the final stage of the process, where the alchemist combines the elements from the previous stages and refines them further. In this mirror, the author experiences a fiery red substance that seems to contain divine power and mystery. This likely refers to the Philosopher's Stone, or the ultimate goal of the alchemical process. Now he explains how the pictures in the book, or mirrors, reveal the secret behind the process. He even says, to bring the three mirrors into one, you must go through these degrees, connecting it to masonry. He finishes off in his conclusion on this ancient stone and that this is the foundation of the highest medicine of chemistry. He even mentions aqua viscosa, which is a clear reference to semen. Quote, aqua viscosa is the first essence, as the wise teach you. Born from and through the art of our nature, the highest tincture is created. End quote. Then just in case you had any questions, towards the end of his conclusion, he mentions the living chalice and horse manure. So it seems that this is some type of secret manual. Now, let's try to decode the images. We begin with Exaltation, with the title, Kabbalah. The first thing that draws our attention is the fire-breathing chimera with the old headwear that the popes used to wear, and it had 3 tiers. So, this is a hybrid pope creature, and on its back is a flask that contains a raven, a peacock, and a phoenix rising towards the sun, creating the Philosopher's Stone. At the top of this flask we see a star emitting divine energies into the glass bottle. This is to represent the importance of astrological influences as we mentioned earlier. I do find it interesting that they have this threefold symbolism with the zodiac, and they happen to put Taurus with a cow under this chimera. Leo is the sulfur in this case, and Capricorn is the mercury, obviously leaving Taurus at the bottom as a transmutation or amalgamation. Therefore, this is undeniably a homunculus. The next page is called Mirror, Art and Nature, and we get some coat of arms symbolism. We see a phoenix, or more likely an eagle, with a book saying Prima Materia. This is the pillar of nature. To the right, we get a lion, the Lion of Venice. This is the pillar of art, and the book says Ultima Materia, or the final matter, the final product of the art of alchemy. This begins to show that yes, royalty and coat of arms is connected to everything we've been discussing. We see the hidden knight's helmet, because he's being cloaked and hidden, crowned with a literal phoenix cap that resembles the ancient Hebrew and Mesopotamian Phrygian caps. We also see the 3 spears on a shield, and this is the 3 mirrors and stages of the alchemical process. These can also be seen on coat of arms. We continue to the middle section of this image, where we see to the left a man carving his way through a tunnel into the mountain and using a candle to help him lead the way. He also has his cap, and on the ground you can see the square and compass. Below at the bottom we kind of have the underground components to the image. This is the underground laboratory. This is where the process of distillation and purification occurs. Above, we see the methods and template in which this takes place. We see that they're continuing with the symbols of Mercury, Saturn, Mars, and Venus. They've laid this all out geometrically and assigned the different arts. Then to the left, we see the extraction process with 2 snakes and dealing with 2 processes of nature. It says hot, dry, cold, moist. To the far right of this middle section is the final output. It's showing you the successful process being exported ready to pick up. Then, when we get to the next image, conjunction, we see arranged the zodiacal rulers or personifications of planets. The goal at the very top is Mercury or Hermes. Even under, we see a phoenix representing the rebirth process, and that it's all under a mountain. So, is it hidden beneath the earth or from plain sight? We see two men aspiring for this goal. One is chasing a rabbit into a hole, one that most likely goes very deep. And then, the other man approaches the subject blindly and with faith. There's an entire structure underneath this mountain, and this is the underground process and art in which this occurs. Inside, it seems to be a king with a scepter and a queen with a rose or a flower. Finally, the background is the zodiac, followed by the four elements. Now we get to the end, multiplication. This scene depicts the resurrected Christ offering the water of life to the king and the queen. But underneath them underground, it would seem that we see the planets personified again, but almost as if they were some secret cult group. They are waving their bellows from below as they raise their arms to the fiery swords that seem to be preventing them from proceeding. Meaning, these are the planets that have been extracted, or in other words, their influences, and that they've been personified and or captured into a form. The alchemical process is beginning. We see Jesus sitting in a fountain at the very bottom, crowned. The text in Old German says, "the brown of the learned." Now I'm not going to break that down just yet, and we got a lot more to say on Jesus, but if you've been paying attention, you should know what's going on here. Also, the pool is filled with his blood as he has a hole on his right side. The next tier, or level of the fountain, is Mars and Venus, or Mary, holding a heart in flames. The next level is Saturn holding a baby, and Jupiter with lightning bolts and a scepter. It actually seems to be Libertas. Finally, at the top, Hermes, or Mercury, representing the transmutation process with the staff of Caduceus, representing the balancing of both positive and negative forces. Behind the fountain is a garden, the fruits of this understanding and art. This is the multiplication, the production or artificial generation of matter. We also see another code, which is most likely Rosicrucian in nature. We see a dove, which is a well-known symbol of the Holy Spirit in Christianity. The Holy Spirit is often associated with divine inspiration, and so, this is what guides the alchemists. But more so, it represents the process of transformation, but this is also a spiritual pursuit. We see another compass or threefold symbol, with a dove following a path. Between the Tetragrammaton, Jerusalem, and the Fountain of Life, this serves as a messenger between the physical and the divine. That's it for this book, but in the following year of its initial publication, 1616, there appeared a new edition in Latin that contained a dedication to the Rosicrucians, which then unveiled the inspiration behind the work. The original German text does not have this dedication. But this alchemical text that we've been breaking down, Kabbalah, is clearly Rosicrucian in nature. 1614 is when the Rosicrucian manifestos first appeared. The fame of the Brotherhood of the Rosy Cross was published, but it was circulated in manuscripts among German occultists in 1610. The goal was the creation and founding of a secret brotherhood of similarly prepared men. That is why they were published in these works, to find people who could see through these hidden meanings and recruit more members. The manifestos made a promise of a universal reformation of mankind, through a science that built on esoteric truths of the ancient past, which, concealed from the average man, provide insight into nature, the physical universe, and the spiritual realm, which they even said would be kept secret for decades until the intellectual climate might receive it. So the Rosicrucians were a branch of Christian mysticism mixed with Kabbalah, Hermeticism, and alchemy. And we now know that they were using some crazy symbols like the creation of a chimera hybrid homunculus with a Pope hat. We'll see more of these as we progress. But yes, this points and makes clear the type of thinking that these minds had. There's no reason to believe that it's just allegory just yet, as the details will continue to add up. Before we go into deeper matters, we need to discuss the importance of brotherhoods and symbols as it begins to all connect, because the Rosicrucians are the predecessors to Freemasonry. Anyone who thinks it's mockery to even bring up the Masons simply isn't aware of the history of secret fraternities. Furthermore, they all share one same lineage, as we'll see. This idea of the Rosicrucian Order inspired a lot of different famous occultists, some of which already mentioned, such as John Dee. Most scholars and historians are not willing to consider the possibility that there were invisible members who did not publicly announce their allegiance to the cause, but were simply inspired by it. And this gave rise to the Invisible College, which was the precursor to the Royal Society founded in 1660. In fact, even Robert Boyle wrote the cornerstones of the invisible, or as they term themselves, Philosophical College, do now and then honor me with their company. So, whether the skeptics believe the subject of secret brotherhoods means nothing. We know that they were indeed having secret meetings on the secrets of life. As Rosicrucianism developed into Freemasonry throughout Europe, there was a strong presence of the Golden and Rosy Cross. In the ancient accepted Scottish Rite, which was first practiced in France, the literal 18th degree is called the Knight of the Rose Cross. The two earliest Freemasons were Sir Robert Murray and even Ashmole, the author of the chemistry book that we went over earlier. Now, there's no denying the connection, or at least it's worth an investigation, but these matters are kept secret and the scholars showed no interest to connect this secrecy to the subjects of hidden arts and sciences. Masons make it clear that their ancestry goes back to the Knights Templar, and this is also clear in Rosicrucian philosophy and symbolism. However, the Rosicrucians preserve this knowledge with a little bit more secrecy. This path can be followed as a trail as we start to begin to see the similar themes and symbolism. But even stranger, it would seem that the Templars were well aware of the secret arts of alchemy. We'll come back to the Rosicrucians, but first, let's discuss how the Templars tie in with all of this. I highly recommend watching the Christmas video. It's much more than a Christmas video and goes into some crazy stuff involving the Templars. But we shall continue and connect it to this subject. The Knights Templar stand out as one of the most controversial orders. Their legacy, shrouded in mystery, has long been a debate among historians and scholars. We now have arrived to one of the crucial connections, but before we dive in, we must cover their history and also note the lack of conclusive evidence for both sides of the argument. There seems to be two main sides. One side believes that the Templars were accused unjustly, but they faced a fake persecution, on the grounds that they had reached such a state of wealth that King Philip IV and Pope Clement V sought to strengthen their position by eliminating this supposedly powerful and independent organization. But we're going to take a look at that again because there is another side, and it involves looking at this order with new eyes, which many may have a difficult time doing because it's Christianity's most popular military order. Countless video games, movies have been made, and their influence on our culture is quite significant to many people. It seems that we may be dealing with dogma, but interestingly, we will see how this ties into alchemy and the creation of modern-day religions. We'll discuss more of that soon, but of course, if some of these accusations were proven to be even remotely true, then this would bring some serious suspicions to the church as a whole. Let's try to keep an open mind because I believe there are some serious arguments to consider here that deserve to bring suspicion to this powerful elite group of assassins, bankers, and literally pirates who were attempting to possess ancient antiquitech. The Knights Templar have the story that they were known as the poor fellow soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon, that after the first aftermath of the Crusades, the medieval Christian military order was formed so that the poor fellow soldiers, starting from just a small group of 9 knights, which was led by Hugues de Payens and Godfrey de Saint-Omer, they had set off with the mission and took monastic vows to protect Christian pilgrims who were supposedly being attacked by Muslims on the way to the Holy Land. One of the strange things about this whole story is the whole donations stuff, because what ended up happening is that they were literally donated massive amounts of money and architecture, really for no apparent reason other than inspiring others because of their duties to protect. The Knights Templar derived their name from the location where they granted accommodations by King Baldwin II, within his castle and above the supposed remains of Solomon's temple. Not sure why he would do that, but okay. Then the members of the order took vows of personal poverty. Yet, The Templars as an organization accumulated substantial wealth and influence, which is contradictory. In 1129, Saint Bernard of Clairvaux not only contributed a generous sum of money to support the order, but also played a pivotal role in promoting their cause. Owing to their military prowess, the Templars were entrusted with the responsibility of safeguarding and transporting funds for individuals who were reluctant to travel with large sums of money, fearing theft or assault. Let's remember that's the mainstream story because, similar to the Vanderbilts, we have another rags to riches story. The Templars ended up gaining billions of dollars of wealth. Literally, the Templars were the first massive bank. By the mid-12th century, the order had established a network of preceptories, regional headquarters, across Europe and the Holy Land. These preceptories generated revenue through donations, land acquisitions, and agricultural production. As their wealth increased, the Templars began to develop financial services that laid the foundation for modern banking. They offered loans, issued letters of credit, and provided secure storage for valuables, which allowed them to establish a rudimentary banking system. This system, in turn, facilitated trade and enabled the transfer of funds across Europe and the Middle East. So, they were the predecessors to the Dutch East India Company. The Templars were arguably the first transnational corporation. The Knights Templar amassed an immense fortune in a relatively short period, the mainstream story being that they attracted both admiration and envy. As their wealth grew, they became the first true international banking institution, issuing promissory notes that would lay the foundation for modern banking practices, including the origins of the dollar bill, which explains more why we see the symbols that we do today on our money. The Templars acquired vast tracts of land and castles, solidifying their influence and power across Europe and the Middle East. So wait, they started from protecting pilgrims on the roads from Saracen thieves, and now they own their entire fleet of ships, a banking system that processes shipments around the world, including to Muslim territories, and then became treasure hunters seeking some type of ancient artifact known as the Ark of the Covenant? How does that all add up? There's no doubt that they were funded and supported by royalty. They owned much of the land in Europe and were the advisors to the European monarchs. This gave them much political power behind